Hi everyone. Welcome to today we are in session 1 of workshop 1 with Kristin, Ziemke and Chad Everett, and they are going to be talking about connecting readers, finding empathy and humanity through books and beyond. Remember, you can tweet and connect with your presenters today by using the hashtag #TheEdCollabGathering, #1. There's a space between the #EdCollabGathering and the #1. All right, over to you, Kristin.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the EdCollab gathering. We just came off a session, the opening session with Chris Lehman and Heather Rocco, and it was amazing to see educators from all across the world joining us today to celebrate thinking and learning. And so as we gear up for this next session, we're excited that you're here. Welcome from Malaysia, welcome from Kuwait, welcome from Italy, and of course, welcome from right here in the United States. I am thrilled to be here with you today. I'm Kristin, co-author of Connecting Comprehension and Technology, and I'm here today with my really great friend, Chad Everett from Mississippi. Chad, why don't you say hello to our friends?
Well, good morning. Like Kristin said, my name is Chad Everett. I live and learn in North Mississippi. It's actually right outside Memphis. I came into education as an instructional technology specialist, then I got to go back and use a couple of my other degrees. So now I'm serving as a disciplinary hearing officer, and I'm just a strong literacy advocate in my community. One of the things is I sit on the volunteer council, and I'm an adult literacy tutor for one of our local organizations, so I'm all about books and just flooding not only our schools but our communities with books.
Wonderful, and I'm Kristin Ziemke from Chicago, first grade teacher and learning innovation specialist. And so today we're going to get started with our session on books and beyond. And so let me switch over right here and share my screen with you guys. All right, we'll click here and be ready to go. Does that look okay, Carolyn?
It's perfect.
All right, so excellent. So today's session is about finding empathy and humanity through books and beyond. And Chad and I were trying to think a little bit how we came up with this idea, and we've been having lots of conversation about titles that change readers and empowering kids to be in charge of their own learning. And so we'd like to share with you a little bit today some of our ideas for how we help kids build identity for themselves as well as in the classroom and beyond.
All right, so one of the first things that we wanted to do is that we came to is this definition of empathy. And one of the things that I think we realized with current events like Ferguson and some of the other things that we've seen is that adults were struggling with empathizing with one another. Just as we see some of the rhetoric, I know for me on social media from some people that I would consider myself to be close with, or some of the political pundits out there, that as a global community, we need more work when it comes to being more empathetic with one another. And one of the things we have to realize is that even as teachers and educators, when we step into the room and we're going to have these conversations and we're going to try to encourage students to have these conversations and to develop empathy, that we bring our own bias and beliefs to the table, and that we need to notice and know those so that we know how to respond.
Absolutely, and I think you know, we've been talking about this and taking a look at how we can use the resources that we bring into our classroom as windows and invitations into a different perspective, or into the what's next, or, you know, seeing or experiencing something different. But I think also importantly, using titles that we use with kids as mirrors as well, and holding it up to see and to share your own story. I think something that Chad and I have been talking about for the last couple of years is that the titles that we bring into our classrooms definitely tell a story. And I think it's important as educators to reflect upon the story that's being told, and to make sure that we're identifying and addressing a lot of different layers and windows into those stories. And so if you're a Twitter user, you might have seen in the last little bit this "We Need Diverse Books" hashtag floating around, and I think a number of educators worldwide. In fact, our friend Victor, who's joining us today from Kuala Lumpur, has been a big supporter of this hashtag. But looking to make sure that our titles reflect our kids and that they're diversified. We also give them opportunities to see other perspectives, but that they're also seeing themselves in the stories that we read aloud, as well as read as novel studies. Do you want to say more about that, Chad?
Absolutely, I think you hit it on the head. That one of the things that I want my students to understand is that your story matters. So one of the things that I'm thinking about, what books I want to bring into the classroom or into the school, or what books I'm plugging with teachers to bring in for kids, is that if I see characters that look like me or maybe are at the same stage of life that I am, I begin to understand that my narrative matters. And that's one of the things for my students that I think is so important, and I'm sure you all think the same thing about your sweet babies that you have in your classroom.
Yeah, and I think as Chad and I started to talk about this, we both had an experience where sort of later in life we found some titles that had an impact on us. And one thing that impacted me was as I was in my undergrad at the University of Missouri, I was in a children's literature class, and we had been studying Faith Ringgold and Tar Beach. And as you know, Faith Ringgold does this job of telling stories through diverse media, and one of her exhibits came to our university, and so to have the experience of investigating her stories with a class and breaking it down through children's literature, but then also to go to the art museum and take a look at her works and to identify how much of the African American story was told through different types of storytelling medium. And Faith Ringgold does a lot with celebrating this piece of quilting and how stories are passed on and told through quilting. And then I had an interest in this art of storytelling across cultures, and so going a little bit deeper and having those media elements, like then investigating the Gee's Bend quilts and how the community of Gee's Bend in Alabama told these stories through the quilts that they made as well, really gave me this multisensory approach to investigating text, to looking at stories, and because it was so layered, really helped me see the perspective of others. And so I think looking back on my reading life, that was something that impacted me.
Absolutely. And Kristin has up, I think, the book that was really powerful for me. And for me, it didn't happen until, and Kristin, you can kill that slide if you want to, but for me, it didn't happen until I was in college. I was an undergraduate student before I got that first piece of text placed in front of me that I think really helped me understand and connect with myself. So it really became that mirror for me, and it's really interesting to see that not happen until I'm in college. And at that point, I think, as a matter of fact, I was a junior in college, but I had a professor come in and he introduces some W.B. Du Bois, and he starts to introduce this I have double consciousness. And I can remember sitting there in class, and all of a sudden it was like all these layers that were there, all these emotions that I had been feeling, I could see that in the text, and it was this reflection of myself that was so powerful. And I hated, no shot at any of the teachers that I had in life, but I hated that it took me being an undergraduate in college before that happened. So that's why I think Kristin and I, and I'm sure you are as well, are so passionate about is early and often in life, we want students to see those pieces of text and those narratives that show them, once again, that their narrative matters.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that we connected was shocking for us. That we had both been later in life, and how did it take that long to find those pieces that connected with us. So what we'd like to do with you guys today is just involve some participation from the group. And what we've done is we've created a little today's meet site Today's Meet is an amazing tool that you can use to collaborate with others. And so if you go to this URL here at the top, todaysmeet.com/gathering, you'll be invited to our virtual chat room. And what we would like to do is hear a little bit from you. So I'm going to, once you type in this URL right here at the top, todaysmeet.com/gathering, you'll see a screen that says add your nickname, and if you type your name in the box and click join, you'll be able to share a message in this box. So what Chad and I would love to hear is we'd love to know a title that maybe helped you understand yourself, helped you understand others, or helped you understand the world a little bit differently. So if you could start by just introducing yourself, like, hi, I'm Kristin, oops, spell my name, Kristin, first grade teacher from Chicago. And then if you just click say, the chat room will populate your thinking and your ideas here. So if you could introduce yourself and share a title that helped you understand yourself, others, or the world, that would be a great place to get started today. So I'll give you a moment to jump in and share some of those titles, and then we'll continue on.
And I can see that we're starting to have some people typing in today's meet there. Elaine, we're so glad to have you with us.
Absolutely. And let's see here. Perfect. So let's head back into our chat. I know, Erica, you're joining us and sharing some of the work that you have done with students and some of your favorite titles. But let's pop back in here to our presentation. All right. And so here you can see the Today's Meet site. We'll then start dropping some of these titles onto Twitter and share some of that information with you guys as well about titles that really change you. And I think when we talk about those pieces and taking a look at titles that change students, it's great to connect with our colleagues and to really think about titles that they're recommending, or what type of students we teach, or how those pieces matter. And so as I take a look at the Today's Meet now, we can see that we've got people joining us from all over the place. Thank you for being here, Brianna from South Carolina and Holly from Mississippi. Yay, so great to have you guys here, and Dana from Texas. It's awesome. But if you guys could, just take a moment and share with us, what were some titles that maybe impacted you? Anything from read-alouds that you might be doing in early elementary to titles that impacted you as a collegiate, as Chad and I shared, to maybe even titles that have impacted you and your students as a teacher recently. Now as a 35-year-old, I have the opportunity to look and say, oh, this new book that just came out changed everything for my kids and I. And I think that's a big piece of the puzzle, as well as being aware of new diverse books that might be published each day. So thank you, Angela from LA. Great to have you here. Ariel from Alaska, rock on. Thank you for getting up early with us. I'm on the West Coast here today too, traveling. So I know this is an early morning for our West Coast friends. So thanks, everybody.
All right, perfect. And as we continue to share there, Kristin, I think one of the things that we also talked about that you all might want to do there, and we'll continue to push through and push those things over to Twitter, but just thinking about what is identity and why does it matter? So even as you're sharing in today's meet, just go ahead and wrestle with those two questions as well and post your thoughts. And if you're doing it on Twitter, I'll sort of open another window here on the side and take a peek. But we'd love to hear your thoughts about what does identity mean to you, or how would you define identity? And then why does it matter maybe for you as the lead learner in your classroom, and why does it matter for your students?
Absolutely. We've got some great titles, and it looks like 14 Cows for America has come up a couple of times. Great title there. Out of My Mind by Sharon Draper is a phenomenal story about differently abled students and learners and what their experiences might be like. Fish in a Tree, yes, that's on my nightstand. I am reading it now and talking about it with a group of fourth graders. So that is a new title that I am falling in love with. Thanks for sharing, everybody. Oh, and Karen, I have to say, Little House on the Prairie, for me, that was a transformative book in my childhood, and I really thought that I was Laura Ingalls and visited all her homes around the Midwest, and I'm now currently reading the new book for Little House on the Prairie. And I think us back to some of these bigger questions about, you know, identity, like what connects to you? Who are you as a thinker and learner? Who are our students as thinkers and learners? And how can we guide them to do that even more so and even better than before? So let's move on here. I want to talk through. You guys, please keep using that Today's Meet. That's a tool for us to connect and collaborate. But I want to talk a little bit about this identity piece and how we can help students build awareness of their identity. And these are two work samples that kids created. We use a mentor text model. This is 45, and I'm going to share that with you in a little bit. But modeling for kids, what is it like to be an 8-year-old? What is it like to be a 14-year-old? And so starting this investigation in identity with some writing. I love this one on the left. 8 is helping other people. 8 is loving each other. 8 is learning about your family history, eating cake and cupcakes. 8 is being who you want to be, like me. And so giving kids the opportunity to think, to pause and think about their identity. I love this one from an 8th grader too. Closer to the bottom there, at 14, you look up to people who have had influence in your life. At this age, it's all about Twitter and Tumblr and reading hateful comments about appearances or defending your idols. And so as we turn it over to kids to reflect on it, we immediately get knowledge of student that we can use to match titles and books to readers, as well as to have conversations with our students about what matters and why. One lesson we do to, can you guys see that? Are you able to see some of these work examples? No? No?
No.
Okay, let's go back here. Try this. Sorry. Alrighty. Let me pop into, can you see now?
Great.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so just to flip back, we were talking about writing. This is 8 and this is 14. One of the identity lessons that we do with students is in 4th grade, we start by building these identity webs and, you know, brainstorming, and of course modeling. The gradual release of responsibility piece is so critical in this, modeling the different layers of who we are as a thinker and learner. And, you know, whether it's some of those obvious things such as I'm a daughter, I'm a 5th grader, I'm a learner, pulling back these layers of thinking. And this kind of becomes a core piece in writing development as students have this to go back to over time. I love this one on the left specifically. This was a 4th grade student that I was working in her classroom, and I had noticed she was writing her identity web in both English and Spanish, and when I asked her about it, she said, you know, sometimes when I think about myself, I can only think in Spanish, and those are the words that come to mind. And I thought, oh, you know, that's a powerful piece about who you are. You're a thinker and learner in 2 languages, and that story of you shapes all that you do moving forward. As kids create these identity webs, they then start to write about them. And I'm a guitar learner, a tree climber, and a techie. I'm a salad lover and music lover. This is actually a lesson that I learned from Kelly Gallagher, and he modeled this and did this lesson at a grown-up PD using Emily Mendel's This is 45, an essay on the eye of life's storm. And if you go and check out this website, and we'll be sure to tweet it out a little bit later, but you can see her essay reflecting on where she is, where she's been, and where she hopes to go at this piece of being 45 right now. And so I think a lot of times we notice that practices we use with teachers we can take and go back and do with students. And so whereas this was a teacher PD, we did it with grades from 1st through 8th grade and really got kids to think about who they were and then moved on to that piece of why they matter. Chad, do you want to share a little bit on that?
Absolutely. I think the next slide has that piece that I went back with a group of teachers, or that I used with a group of teachers, and that they went back and used with their students in their classrooms. And it was a piece using George Ella Lyon's poem Where I'm From. And so on the left you see that mentor text, George Ella Lyon's poem. And I love it because one of the things that we've talked about today, and that I know Chris mentioned earlier, was as adults, us connecting to one another, and in PD sessions or just in the building or PLCs, wherever we are, it's easy to forget that just because we're in the same building every day as professionals, that doesn't mean that we're connecting in deep and authentic ways the same way. And I think the same thing goes for our students. Just because they're in those classrooms together every day, we've got to intentionally create those moments where our students connect with one another. So on the right is one of the work samples from one of the teachers that I worked with, and they went back, and I think this was a 1st grade teacher, and she went back and did it with her students. But I just love it because one of the things that this poem does is it helps you really think about how who's been important in your life and some of those important experiences. And one of the things, if we're teaching craft, that the poem has is there's a line in there about maybe a powerful quote in your life, something that you heard quite often. For me, it was probably, boy, you better sit down. But I love it because students sort of get to also play with craft as they explore identity at the same time. And I think a point that I feel like I should make here is that even as we're building empathy and humanity and connecting students with one another, at the heart of everything that we're doing is still good teaching. And we can't lose sight of that. I don't care what standards we're teaching, where you live. I don't care whether empathy and humanity are in your standards document or not. It's important for us to teach students that, and no matter how we do it, we're still teaching the standards, and we're not only preparing students for college and career, but I'm preparing my students for right now.
Absolutely, and I think you know, even more than college and career, right? Like, yes, those are things that we're taking a look at, but we're preparing them to be citizens of the world. And nothing's more important to that. You know, our colleague and one of my great friends, Sarah Ahmed, has a new book out called Upstanders, and it's for middle grade learners, but it's all about this piece of building identity and citizenship and connecting and respecting kids. She co-authored with Smokey Daniels, and Smokey Daniels and Nancy Steinecke have done some tremendous things with this layer of building empathy and getting kids to a point where they can share their thinking and learning effectively, right? And so these are some snapshots from my colleague Jenna Boyle's classroom, and here they're doing what Smokey calls the social academic skills needed for learning. We're teaching kids how to talk to each other, how to collaborate, how to engage in conflict resolution, so that we can get to these bigger thinking pieces down the road. And so I think the explicitness and the gradual release that goes along with that is critically important. All right, so let's talk a little bit about you know, text that matters and matching those books to readers.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is probably going to be my most favorite part of the presentation, because I get to talk about the group of, or at least one of the groups of students that I get to learn with every day. And I say learn with because I'm a member of that learning community, and they teach me as much or even more than I teach them. So the picture you see in front of you now to the right is a group of young men that I work with. It's one of my boys' book clubs that we implemented. And context, I think, is important here, right? So these group of students are in a school, Title I school, 87% free and reduced lunch. But one of the things that we were dealing with is that we realized that a lot of the young men that were in this building had never really had a positive male role model, and that they weren't really seeing themselves as readers and writers. One of the things that happened as I was talking to a student one day, and I was talking to the way that we were dealing with a student discipline issue. And I said, hey, have you ever considered maybe writing out what's going there if you don't feel like you can express it? And he was like, writing? That stuff's for girls. And I was like, whoa, hold on. Like, even as men, we need to realize that there's nothing girly about writing. Real men write. And I need reading and writing to be a part of your identity. So, of course, he should have never said that, because now he got his book club, or he gets to be a member of the book club. So what we started with was one of our local literacy organizations, and I encourage you all to do this in your own communities when you're thinking about where am I going to get pieces of text from. They donated the books to start our book club. So the book that was on that slide, The 14th Goldfish by Jenny Home, powerful piece of text for my students. One of the themes or elements that's in that book that was really powerful for those young men is that they're fifth graders getting ready to transition into sixth grade, and the female protagonist in The 14th Goldfish is at that same stage of life, and she moves into sixth grade, and she's had this friend that she's had her entire life, but we sort of know the middle years can be interesting when it comes to shaping friendships, and we're maturing and we're developing new friendships. So that's one of the things that really connected with those young men. But one of the things that happened, and I think it's on the next slide in the presentation, is I had to be strategic about the way that I opened the book club, because keep in mind what we said earlier. I wanted students to have both windows and mirrors, but for some of the young men that are in that book club, or essentially all of them, I became a mirror of sorts, because now they get to see that real men are readers and writers, and I wanted my students to see teacher as learner-in-chief. And when I say learner-in-chief, that doesn't mean that I sit in the big chair and just teach and then they go do. It means that I do alongside them and model for them what it looks like. So on this slide to the right, what you have is one of the first things that I wanted to do, since for some of them they had never seen reading and writing as part of male identity, is I just shared my writing life with them. And I said, here's the deal, guys, I'm a graduate student. So for me, my writing life looks an awful lot like when I've gotten through hammering out a paper, it's about 2 in the morning, I'm sitting on the couch with my laptop and I'm just typing in Evernote. And I'm reading this for the students, and one of the young men raises his hand, hey, Mr. Everett, you wrote that? It sounded like you reading out a book. Like, that's what good writing is, and your writing is just as important as mine. So just going back to the element of them seeing themselves as readers and writers. So what began to happen is that students developed this real passion. So on the left, what you have is a couple work samples that now I get walking down the hall or standing in lunch, or sometimes they stop other people in the hall to hand them work samples to give to me. But this is a young man who, ever since the book club started, this passion that he has for reading and writing has been incredible. At the top is one of the books that he self-published. I think he's on about his 4th or 5th book now that he's self-published down in the classroom. It's kind of hard to see, but one is Lighting the Candle Fire, which is a piece of informational text that he wrote. One is the top 10 ways you can make someone mad, and then he's working on a short story at the top. But it's been really interesting to see how they begin to see reading and writing as an important part of their narrative and see themselves as readers and writers. But for that to happen, as teachers, we've got to be vulnerable and we've got to lead the way. And for me, that was just showing students my reading and writing. And I'm sort of previewing what we're going to on the next slide, but I don't want to spill where we're headed. But one of the things also is, now you see on the screen we have blog on the wall. Well, when we're working with students in the classroom, and even for those of you that feel like, hey, I don't have a lot of technology because that's where we're headed next, but you still want powerful ways for your students to connect with one another and write in the classroom every day, it's this concept of blog on the wall, where it's hard for me to tell on my screen, but there's one color for the initial, so same concept as blogging. We're using one color for the initial post, and then for the comments, they're using yellow sticky notes to provide feedback to one another. And I think the central question this day was, have you ever known someone who has shown great resilience during a crisis? But I could change that question to anything I wanted it to be, but it's just one of those ways for my students to connect with one another in the classroom face-to-face every day. And also what I'm doing is I'm developing those skills that I know they're going to need when it comes time for us to move it online and start blogging. So we're sort of prepping for that gradual release of responsibility. Kristin, do you want to talk about sort of where we go next from there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this piece of gradual release is so critically important, especially as we're talking about kids who are starting to have conversations about some big issues, and to not only connect with text, but now we're moving into a piece where we're connecting with text, images, media, and we're giving kids this opportunity to have voice, sometimes for the first time in their lives, but to use that voice to really think about who they are, who others are, and how we can sort of find more common ground with that along the way. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about next, as we talk about we find books, and then we give our kids the opportunity to move beyond that and really take a look and see, you know, what are those pieces that matter and why. So we're thinking about building understanding beyond the classroom. And of course, we love to start with this piece of text. This is a classroom that I spent a lot of time in this year at St. Margaret of Scotland School. But here we started with a reading frenzy, and we just flooded the room with texts and titles that dealt with social justice as well as the civil rights movement. As the teacher, we introduced many of these titles with short book talks, and then gave kids a wide variety of resources to use and to access around this. And here this student was so moved and empowered by some of the stories about Ruby Bridges, and so we had layers of text that we presented. She was so excited to know that Ruby Bridges was still alive, that she felt as a third grader she could connect back to Ruby as a young learner, and had many questions for her about her experience. And so she connected with Ruby on Twitter. She tweeted her a number of questions. She didn't hear back from Ruby Bridges, but she didn't give up. And so what she then did was she went to Ruby Bridges Foundation website and completed a whole comment about how she's trying to get in touch with Ruby because she had to tell her story too. And I loved the tenacity of that, because, you know, just because you don't get your solution one way doesn't mean that you give up. And so she continued to reach out. She hasn't heard back from Ruby Bridges yet, but this is a piece where she's connecting, where she's seeing not only windows of what it maybe was like in different times, but also mirrors of, you know, a young girl who connected with education and loved books, and essentially mirrored much of what this child values today in the classroom. A great way to help learners see themselves is to connect with authors that we love, and we do that a lot with Twitter. We had Pajama Day the other day, and so you can see in this image on the left here, these guys are reading a variety of different graphic novels in our new innovation studio. And so we tweeted all the authors that they're reading, and every single author wrote back. You know, Chad was talking about how great Jenny Holmes' book is, and I just can't say enough to both Jenny and Matt Holm for helping my developing readers see that real authors were first graders just like them. Real authors were third graders just like them. And when Matt Holm here on the right, you can see he writes back, that shot comics and Legos covers about 9% of my childhood, and the other 10% Star Wars. For my kids to know that Matt loves Legos like them, that he loved graphic novels, that Star Wars was a piece of who he is, you know, that changes their vision and builds understanding and connection to what they're reading about. My co-author, Katie Mutaris, shared this blog post with us, but one of her students a few years ago reached out to Rita Williams Garcia and shared about how the book One Crazy Summer impacted her as a thinker, and it was a book that she connected with, and it was that powerful interaction that developed this child to become someone who viewed themselves as a reader. And so a student blogged about her experience with One Crazy Summer. Katie smartly took the link to that blog site and tweeted it out to Rita Williams Garcia. And here you can see on the right, Rita wrote this amazing comment to 10-year-old Gabby. And so when we look at connections and experiences that change readers, writers, thinkers, learners, you know, we can see even as a 30-something to connect with an author that I know and love would be transformative. When we put that power in the hands of a 10-year-old, it really does change not only how we think about ourselves today, but how we move forward in the future. Katie also did this great project with her students where they adopted the teacher aspect of Slice of Life Challenge, which was, of course, started by 2 writing teachers, where teachers blog every day for the month of March, and this was impactful for Katie. She transferred this piece to her students to give them an authentic voice, and so for every day during the month of March, Katie's students blogged, and as they did that, they connected not only with classmates across the hall and in their school, but with thinkers and learners around the world. And as Katie's kids had conversations with students in Malaysia and New Zealand, they really started to think differently about themselves as writers. You can see here, you know, it felt so good to share your thinking with the world. At the bottom, I never really liked writing so much, but blogging, even though it was hard, felt good. I felt like people cared. And as students initially started having conversations with kids in other countries about differences, they very quickly came to the realization that, you know, we're not so different from each other and that we have a lot of similarities. And I love this one at the bottom of this page where a student says, you know, maybe if more people talk to other people, we wouldn't have so many problems in the world. And I think it's that powerful piece of conversations. You know, we have to first sit down and have a conversation about something in order to make gains and to get to some of the important pieces that our kids need to do to not only view themselves but to view others. I have some amazing colleagues and a fantastic PLN of Chicago Public School teachers, including Autumn Laidler and Ben Kovacs. You can see their Twitter here. But a number of years ago, we started a shared inquiry project between 1st, 4th, and 6th grade from kids at different schools to build awareness of, you know, like we're all thinkers and learners in the Chicago Public Schools, and whereas it started as a science inquiry into bats, over time these kids became partners and colleagues. And it was at a time when Chicago was a very violent place and was often in the news defined as Chirac, as more people were dying on the streets of Chicago than were dying in the Iraq conflict. And so the students decided collaboratively to take action and to go public. And I think that's where we see this big piece of empowerment, where kids start identifying and seeing themselves outside of the classroom and knowing that they have a voice and that that voice matters. And so here, 4th grade made a series of infographics and posters to share with the world. 1st grade wrote and authored a book on, you know, what to do with bullies and what that might look like and sound like, and how we could share our thoughts using tools like the internet and websites with the world as students illustrated and generated text to tell their stories about what you could do instead of having a conflict with somebody. And then, of course, sixth grade helped us pull it all together and made some really powerful public service announcements that then spread beyond our schools and connected with kids all over Chicago as well as around the world to build this idea of students offering solutions and taking a look at what empowerment looked like and sounded like for kids. And so I think that brings us back to this piece of empathy and taking the perspective of others and really thinking about some of those pieces. Chad, how about you share a little bit on that? Let me pop this out here. There we go. Can't hear you.
All right. Chad forgot to turn his mic. Got it. Can y'all hear me now? Perfect.
Yeah.
So we go back to that original definition of empathy, right? And that's what all we've been talking about all day long, no matter whether we're talking about blog on a wall or whether we were talking about connecting students to authors. We're continuing to help our students develop empathy and build humanity. So going back and thinking about those pieces of text, and when you're going back to your classrooms next week and you're deciding what you're going to do, let's just remember, I think one of the big takeaways is that lenses, that those pieces of text give our students lenses, and as adults they provide us with lenses that we see the world through. So the character may become my lens, the teacher in my classroom may become a lens for me. So as we're thinking about that when I go to get glasses, a prescription is for a particular need, and that we're connecting students with books that meet their needs. Hard issues can be dealt with by finding text that has similar characters or issues or problems with some of my students. So if I notice that there's something particular in my classroom that's going on and I want to address it, but I don't want to maybe use a student's personal story, I may find a piece of text with that similar issue or situation and bring it in. Anything you want to tag on there, Kristin?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to address a couple of the questions that I saw coming in on Twitter. Chris Bronke asks, how do you balance having text as mirrors and also text that grow understanding of other cultures too? And I think for me it comes back to that piece of being intentional. You know, everything that we do is intentional and measured. There's no happenstance or very little in how we select our read alouds. We're looking at our students. We're collecting data from them every single day on what their emotional needs are, what their physical well-being needs are, and really giving them multiple perspectives. You know, and I think that becomes more important as we move into an even more global society.
Absolutely.
I think it looks like we've got a couple other questions. Frankie Siverson is asking, Frankie Siverson is asking, how can we use resources to bring in the classroom as windows and mirrors? And I think, you know, we're looking for text and we're talking about this piece, but I think even more than the physical objects, of course we can use multi-layered instructional pieces, but just as Chad was talking about, having conversations and, you know, pushing back on our students and talking about, why do you think that? You know, where did that idea come from? I think one of the most powerful things that we can do as teachers is often say, you know, I don't exactly know, but I'm happy to help you find someone that can speak to you more about that or give you more ideas on that. Do you want to add on to that, Chad?
Right, and I think one of the things that happens is, remember, our students become windows and mirrors for each other. So that conversation piece that you mentioned earlier is that sometimes it's, like you said, stepping back and saying there may be someone in this classroom that can speak to that better than I can, and I allow my student to become a window or a mirror for someone else in the classroom.
Yeah, I love that, and I think you know, that goes back to that piece of student voice and empowerment. And if we can ask our kids to do some of that heavy lifting, you know, and to be there for each other, we're ultimately getting to this big picture goal of developing citizens. And nothing is more important than that, as I said before. And so as we wrap up today, you know, we come back to this piece where it's all connected. Empathy, conversations guide us to that piece of transformation. And I think really help not only our students, but our colleagues and ourselves shift the narrative on what's possible and to build this idea of empowerment and thinking. So as we wrap up today, Chad and I will be popping back into the Today's Meet after this session, as well as connecting and following up with some of the Twitter feed. But we are so excited that you guys joined us today. We are thrilled to have some of these important conversations with you and really look forward to this piece of continuing the conversation as we move forward. Chad, final thoughts?
I think you covered it. Thank you all so much for joining us. Please continue to participate in the conversation, like Kristin said, in today's meeting on Twitter. And let's just remember, this is not a one-day thing, but let's keep that conversation going for as long as all of us are in the profession.
All right. Wonderful. And we'll pass it back to Carolyn.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Kristin, for that very insightful and engaging presentation. I just want to remind all our viewers that their session 2 is coming up, and we have some really great presentations in session 2. So please do stay tuned. I'm just going to share with you quickly the workshops that will be coming up. So session 2, we have workshop number 4, where Kathy Collins and Matt Glover will be presenting on nurturing young readers. Workshop number 5 by Catherine Hale and her reading buddies. That's going to be pretty exciting. She's going to have her kids in the room with her talking about facilitating learners and readers in the classroom using iTunes. And session number 6 by Heather Rocco, Tony Sinanis, Janice Swartzy, John Fritzy, and Ross Lee Byrne, where they will be talking about tackling leadership challenges and leading with joy. I really hope you can join us. And I really hope you stay tuned for those fabulous presentations. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.